ready, just call it. The words of Labour leader Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions today, where he challenged Rishi Sunak on allowing the country to head to the polls right away. But the PM rejected the call for an immediate general election, saying his working assumption is still that it will be in the second half of the year. Sir Keir also mocked the controversial Rwanda bill, accusing Rishi Sunak of not personally believing in it and asking how he spent £600 million on what he called a gimmick to deport just 300 people.
Let's just take his Rwanda policy. When they first announced this gimmick, they claimed it would settle tens of thousands of people. The Home Office then whittled it down to a mere 300. 4 times that number have already arrived this month, and the backlog stands at 130,000. Can the Prime Minister see any flaw in his plan to deport less than 1% of that backlog?
The Prime Minister insisted his party is the only one taking the issue seriously, saying Labour will keep the boats coming.
It's crystal clear, not only does the Labour Party not have a plan to fix this issue, but the truth is they don't actually care about fixing this issue. When he talks about the gangs, when we gave the police new powers to crack down on the people smuggling gangs, he spent months campaigning and voting against it. If it was up to him, those criminals would still be out on our streets, Mr. Speaker. And the truth is, if he wasn't the Labour leader, he'd still want to be their lawyer.
Joining me now in the studio, TalkTV's political correspondent, Alicia Fitzgerald. Hi, Alicia. Former Labour official, Richard Power-Sayeed, and political commentator, Michael Crick. Welcome to you all. Let's start with Alicia. Let's see whether we really think anything material is going on or whether this is just a lot of gas and guff that adds up to nothing at all. What is happening, if anything?
In terms of the Rwanda policy?
In terms of all of this in exchange of kind of stylised insults which don't really appear to have any genuine menace or malice or really anything much
Every
at all.
PMQs. Just every PMQs.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally the feeling today was that it was a really lacklustre Prime Minister's Questions. And I mean, I say that with the knowledge that lots of them have been that way as well previously. But I think today they covered such a breadth of topics. And it was like one question about one thing and then jumping to something else. And it kind of felt like both sides were really just clinging on anything they could to try and insult the other person rather than focusing on something that would have potentially been the issue of the week like they normally do. There's a lot more kind of mudslinging, a lot more, you know, he said, she said. And I think most people walked away and just thought, really, this is meant to be a time that the Prime Minister is questioned and held to account on decisions that he's made. And it just felt like that didn't happen so much this week.
Yeah, Richard, not a particularly edifying spectacle.
Can we just get rid of PMQs? Tony Blair halved it, as in you got rid of one a week. And I mean, I just think it's so useless. People talk about the theatre of the Commons. I hate it. I hate the way they shout at each other. It makes me want to go live in Scotland and watch their boring parliament, because at least people are polite to each other. When Mark Drakeford gave his leaving speech, resignation speech yesterday in the Senate, he was applauded by the Conservative members there, even though they criticised him very, very aggressively.
They were just so relieved. Maybe they were just clapping with great relief that his term was over. Michael Crick, Prime Minister's Question Time's some kind of relic of the Etonian Debating Society, or something that we really do need and is a great jewel in the crown of the country? Which do you think?
Well, the Americans love it, don't they? There are lots of Americans who you know, tune in every week on C-SPAN or wherever it's broadcast in America. I remember when I was queuing for the laying in state, when was it, the year before last, and with this American family, and they were saying, tell us all about John Bercow, you know, what's he like? And I said, it's Lindsay Hoyle now. And then amazingly, just as we came into the St Stephen's entrance, who came out but Lindsay Hoyle, and I was able to introduce them. So, no, America, I mean, the important thing about Prime Minister's Questions is it's the visible showing of MPs holding the executive to account, which of course they do at other question times with all the departments and in select committees. The other thing about Prime Minister's Questions, and any Prime Minister or advisor will tell you this, is it makes the Prime Minister focus on what are the big issues right now, what are we doing, what's going on in government. And so the preparation, which takes several hours that morning, the night before, is very, very useful for better governance, believe it or not.
No.
You might think the governance couldn't be worse, but actually I think it's a great institution. Long may it live.
Oh, long may it live.
And by the way, he didn't halve it. He just amalgamated the two 15 minutes together into one.
That's
Tony
a very,
Blair.
very good correction, very good correction.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be better if, sorry, I know this would be so boring, but wouldn't it be better if we just had the liaison committee a bit more often? That's where
That is boring.
That's
I mean,
Richard, careful what you wish for. Are you joking? It's like the most soul-destroying hour ever.
And the reason why it's boring is because they get one or two questions, they get 5 minutes each, and they can never really get to grips with him, and then it moves on to somebody else, probably from an opposite party.
Well, let's have a bit of good news then. The rate of inflation fell to its lowest level in almost 2.5 years last month as price rises for food and eating out slowed sharply. February's dropped to 3.4% from 4%, means the cost of living is rising at its slowest pace since September 2021. Food and non-alcoholic drinks, cafes, restaurant prices drove the fall, but alcohol, tobacco, clothing and footwear prices also eased. There is a however, though. However, housing and fuel prices continued to rise rapidly. So Rishi Sunak presumably will take this as a personal feather in his personal cap, Alicia.
Definitely. And this is always one of those topics that become a bit up for debate when it becomes politicised, because when Rishi Sunak made halving inflation one of his 5 pledges, lots of people said, hang on, how much of a role do the government actually have in shifting inflation and shifting the dial there? And lots of times when it has dropped, he's come under a lot of fire and a lot of criticism for the fact that actually it wasn't down to measures that he put in place. It was things that the Bank of England did, or it was a lot of external factors as well, whether that's conflicts overseas or just other things that influence the economic landscape of the country. So yes, whilst he can kind of use this and say, yes, it's going down and that's something that I've done, lots of people will question that and say, hang on, was this you or is this just an external thing? But let's just be real. Of course, that's good news. Inflation coming down is always a good thing.
Michael, can he claim credit for it? Is it fair?
He can't claim credit for it, really. I mean, when it first started, of course, he said it's nothing to do, it's not our fault, it's the fault of world factors. And it's the same point the other way around. And although it's great news for everybody that it is now getting very low, of course, it's caused it's not as if prices are coming down, they're just not going up as fast as they did. Stamps, for instance, are about to go up by 8% and 13%. By the way, the best possible investment you can do, buy all your stamps for the next 3 years now. You won't get a better investment.
And people will be
I'm
looking
not a
at you
financial advisor.
as people of a certain youth will look at you and just think, stamps, what are they?
I know.
They will never use them. They won't have seen one. They won't know that you used to lick them, but now you don't have to lick them. Whenever I'm anywhere near my children or grandchildren, they laugh and say, are you about to post a letter? And then when I do, they look at me as if I'm putting washing through an iron mangle or so using the pigeon. And I say yes, because I still pay everything with she's looking at me horrified. A check, an envelope and a stamp. But you and I are the only people in the country with any stamps.
And I love doing it. It's the ritual of putting the stamp on and taking the letter to the post box. However, getting back to inflation,
yes,
a huge amount of disruptions being caused, to those people whose incomes have not been rising with inflation.
Yes.
So they are significantly worse off. And you will still get strikes from people trying to remedy that. Because a lot of people, some people whose pensions have been frozen or whatever, or not gone up much, can't do much about it. So it's not as if it's all hunky-dory.
But Richard, maybe a slight feel-good factor, which helps politicians, particularly politicians in power, doesn't it? If there's a slight feeling of, God, it's not as hard as it was, things are easing a little bit, the household food purchase isn't as unbelievably, swingingly, stiflingly suffocating as it was last week. Maybe that's a good thing, no?
Well, this is the point, that it's not that it's getting better, it's getting worse more slowly now. That's what the rate of inflation slowing means. And it's really striking, isn't it, that it's fuel and housing that's still going up. Why is that? Because those are the industries where landlords and energy companies manage to speculate and exploit us most aggressively. But
with housing, of course, it is getting tighter and tighter. In that, the houses are not being built fast enough to accommodate the rising population. So, I mean, that is inevitable.
All right, let's talk about one of the surprise political stories today, and that is the story of the departure of Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, who says it's for both personal and political reasons, and everyone in his own party was taken completely by surprise. I think everyone in his own country is in absolute shock. So does anybody have any light to shed on this? I mean, some people amongst us might have been dining only recently with the Irish ambassador, and it wasn't me. I didn't. But so somebody might know something.
Well, all I can say is that the person that you're referring to found that that didn't mention it at all. That they didn't mention it at all. So it clearly came as a huge shock.
I was just hoping to see a
to
really
them.
great picture of me and Leo Varadkar.
I know,
I can't
I mean, it's
see
sad,
it.
really.
Oh, here it is. Look at this. Feast tries on. Look at this. Hello, look at that. Who's that?
Who's that?
Vanessa and Leo Varadkar.
That's Leo Varadkar.
Yes,
isn't it?
yes.
It's the Taoiseach.
He was perfectly happy there. They were having a great time.
It's
Really.
Leo Varadkar and his glamorous friend.
That's exactly
right,
it.
that's right, that's
Who's
right.
that? Who's that with Vanessa as the caption
mean,
on that picture? But the question is, what's happened?
He has been a pioneering Taoiseach. And it's sad. I mean, I don't know how old he is, but he's not that old, is he?
he's not old.
45,
You could. I mean, that's astonishingly young to retire as Prime Minister. You know, he would be good for another 5 or 10 years. On the other hand, it's probably a good idea that Prime Ministers don't last too long because they do get stale eventually. But I mean, you know, who would ever thought, even 20 years, that a gay man could be Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland?
And well loved.
Yeah,
By
exactly.
many, not by everyone, but by many. Well loved by many, and thought, you know, and steering through a coalition government very, very definitely.
Yes, everybody thought that would be
Which
chaotic.
everybody thought
I remember
couldn't
being in
possibly
Ireland
work.
at the time it
Yeah.
was coming about.
Yes.
And it actually has worked.
Okay, look at this. Look how lovely he looks there.
Apparently.
He's very tall, and I'm
These
very
all
small.
come off your mobile
Yes.
phone.
Naturally.
Well, I hope
source
don't
of
forget
most
to
of
take-
our most coveted pictures on this programme is my phone, naturally.
Don't forget to claim the photo
I
fee.
definitely won't. So I've already claimed it, don't be ridiculous. So the question is, any thoughts on why, Alicia?
Well, I mean, I thought it was interesting that he just cited it was both for personal and political reasons, because that's a bit of a pattern we've seen in politics recently. And the person I'm going to cite is Ben Wallace, our former Defence Secretary here. When he stood down as Defence Secretary, he was very much saying that the toll it was taking on his personal life was just too much. Even though he was really passionate about the job, felt really grateful to have done the job. It is a hard job. We need to remember that being in politics is a hard job. And I think after a few years of doing it, lots of people just say the sacrifices are too much, and they've done it, and they just want to kind of go and explore.
And I'm not so convinced, if I'm honest. Like Ben Wallace had sour grapes about not becoming General Secretary of NATO, and Leo Varadkar has just had a crushing defeat in a double referendum that he really should have won. He is doing fairly well steering this coalition, but the winds of change are coming through the Republic of Ireland. Sinn Féin's going to take over, or at least they're going to do much, much better in the next election, everyone expects. The fact is that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have really, really failed the Irish people over many years. They've just offered them a fairly, boring version of liberalism, which hasn't actually improved the lives of working-class Irish people. And you know what? They're sick of it.
I mean, maybe he's adopted the maxim, you know, get out while the going's good and leave them wanting more. And, of course, the last person who did that in this country was Harold Wilson, way back in 1976. And, of course, he had dementia problems at the time, although we didn't know it. But what it did is, and this may happen with Varadkar, it led to years of speculation as to whether there was some other reason behind the scenes.
Yes, yeah.
And it really was just his health.
Meanwhile, Vaughan Gething becomes Wales's 5th First Minister, succeeding Mark Drakeford in the Senedd, Alicia.
Well, I mean, Mark Drakeford was not the most popular First Minister of Wales, definitely. So I think lots of people are actually quite glad to have a new one in Wales. I think Mark Drakeford, really, his legacy was mainly with 20-mile-per-hour zones, which I think that's not something what you say.
And
what's
also
your most
draconian
memorable
lockdown.
thing,
I mean,
and
really draconian lockdown.
Draconian lockdown measures, both of which aren't super positive for him on his departure. So yeah, Vaughan Gething now taking his place, and I feel like lots of people kind of expected that he would be the replacement to Mark Drakeford. So this is something that's less surprising than the previous story.
And does anyone know anything about Vaughan Gething? What kind of personality he is? Anything about his history? Anything about whether he's going to be a good fit for the job or anything like that?
Well, he's been a competent minister, hasn't he, for quite a while in Wales. I think the Labour Party will be hoping that he can. I mean, the embarrassment for the British Labour Party is that the Welsh Labour Party it doesn't been doing that well on things like health and education. The stats are and the Conservatives are constantly saying, well, if Wales is any example of what a Labour government will be like, it'll be a disaster. And they'll be hoping that Vaughan Gething can improve things and turn things round. But he ain't going to do it in time for the general election.
I mean, also the people say, oh, the health service in Wales is not doing particularly well. People are older and sicker in Wales than they are in Britain. That's a fact. So the NHS there is always going to come under much more strain. 20 miles an hour or 20 kilometres an hour? Which one is it?
20 miles per hour.
20 miles an hour. That's a good thing. That is literally saving children's lives. I couldn't care less if a few motorists are annoyed about it. Children are alive right now.
Not a few motorists,
Children are alive now because of that
Yeah,
policy.
but the point is there are vast swathes of Wales where there's nothing at all except the odd beautiful and picturesque mountain with a lamb on it.
Children's lives! Children's lives!
There are not children just playing by the wayside in the absolute mists of the countryside. They're not there.
There are lots of rural communities in Wales.
Though. No, but not those bits, not the middle bits where there's nothing and people have to drive at 20 miles an hour for no reason at all through empty roads through the Black Mountains. It's absolute tosh, isn't it?
As I understand, it's not the whole of Wales that's covered by the 20-mile
Pretty
an hour
much,
limit.
isn't it, though?
It's the busier areas. And in any case, if you reduce the speed limit from 30 miles an hour, sorry, from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour, doesn't mean you drive a third less, because a lot of the time you're driving, you're nowhere near 30
Not
miles
in
an hour.
Wales, where there's nothing much happening for vast, beautiful and picturesque swathes of the country. It's different in different building areas. Lovely to have you all. Thank you very much indeed. Quite enough. An elegant sufficiency of all of your company. Thanks a lot.